I'm Teresa Coraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. My topic today is stacker detractors and Nazis. The thought crime thugs are attacking Substack. I want to preface this by saying that Substack has changed my life. I've always said that I would go to the ends of the earth for a real conversation, and now those conversations come to me from the ends of the earth. I think this is unprecedented, that people are able to have long-form conversations. I say that when I create my episodes, they're only half done. I get to put my thoughts together, put them out there, and then other people can bring not just a random opinion, but also be able to link real information and their own analysis in their own stacks. So this has accelerated, I think, our understanding in a way that I don't believe has ever before happened. It's been amazing to me how much progress we can make when we're allowed to talk and share the things that we've found as real data. That obviously is not something they're very happy about. And I think it is despicable that those who have profited the most from Substack have now turned and used that financial clout to threaten it. As the victors have crowed, Substack says it will remove Nazi publications from the platform. The instigators of this purge seem to be Jonathon Katz and Casey Newton. In November, Katz published Substack has a Nazi problem in the Atlantic. No mainstream media conflict there. Katz was number 2 of 247 Substack authors signing an open letter called Substackers Against Nazis. It said, "We're asking a very simple question that has somehow been made complicated. Why are you platforming and monetizing Nazis?" After quoting from the Katz article, it states, as journalist Casey Newton told his more than 166,000 Substack subscribers after Katz's piece came out, the correct number of newsletters using Nazi symbols that you host and profit from on your platform is 0. We, your publishers, want to hear from you on the official Substack newsletter. Is platforming Nazis part of your vision of success? Let us know. From there, we can each decide if this is still where we want to be. Interesting that somehow now the content providers are the publishers. On December 21st, Substack co-founder Hamish McKinsey responded, "We believe that supporting individual rights and civil liberties while subjecting ideas to open discourse is the best way to strip bad ideas of their power. We are committed to upholding and protecting freedom of expression even when it hurts. As Ted Goya has noted, history shows that censorship is most potently used by the powerful to silence the powerless. Our content guidelines do have narrowly defined proscriptions, including a clause that prohibits incitements to violence. We will continue to actively enforce those rules while offering tools that let readers curate their own experiences and opt in to their preferred communities. Beyond that, we will stick to our decentralized approach to content moderation, which gives power to readers and writers. While not everyone agrees with this approach, many people do, as indicated by L. Griffin's post in defense of decentralized moderation on Substack, which was signed and endorsed by hundreds of writers on the platform, including some of the leading names in journalism, literature, and academia. Even if we were in a minority of 1, however, we would still believe in these principles. It's well worth going to read that full note, along with the thoughtful comments on censorship, most of which are being answered simply by name-calling and insults. And I think that it's a very heartening testimony to how much support there is for freedom of expression. and this is clearly something that Substack has done under duress. On January 2nd, Newton posted that he was considering leaving Substack because it would not demonetize or remove openly Nazi content. He is an industry insider who has made the lucrative switch to going indie while using his mainstream credentials and apparently wanting to make the indie just like the mainstream. Most of his posts are paywalled, but he left open why Substack is at a crossroads, and he wrote, "But turning a blind eye to recommended content almost always comes back to bite a platform. It was recommendations on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube that helped turn Alex Jones from a fringe conspiracy theorist into a juggernaut who could terrorize families out of their homes. It was recommendations that turned QAnon from loopy trolling on 4chan into a violent national movement. It was recommendations that helped build the modern anti-vaccine movement. Until Substack, I was not aware of any major U.S. consumer internet platform that stated it would not remove or even demonetize Nazi accounts. Even in a polarized world, there remains broad agreement that the slaughter of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust was an atrocity. The Nazis did not commit the only atrocity in history, but a platform that declines or removes their supporters is telling you something important about itself. If it won't remove Nazis, why should we expect the platform to remove any other harm? I'm proud of the platformer, his own readership, for standing up for their principles in this way. Some of our earliest and best customers are people who work in tech policy, content moderation, and trust and safety. They've spent years doing the work, making the hard calls, apparently whether to delete your content, and cleaning up the internet for all of our mutual benefit. It's only natural that they would resist spending money on a platform that spurns their profession in this way and apparently doesn't want to pay them for that. Over the past few days, the platformer team analyzed dozens of Substacks for pro-Nazi content. Earlier this week, I met with Substack to press my case that they should remove content that praises Nazis from the network. Late today, we submitted a list of accounts that we believe to be in violation of the company's existing policies against incitement to violence. I am scheduled to meet with the company again tomorrow. Whatever becomes of those accounts, however, I fully expect that more will spring up in their wake, so long as Substack allows itself to be perceived, encourages itself to be perceived as a home for Nazis. They will open accounts here and start selling subscriptions. Why wouldn't they? Every platform hosts its share of racist, white nationalist, and other noxious personalities. In some very real sense, there is no escaping them online. But there ought to be ways to see them less, to recommend them less, to fund them less. Other platforms have realized this as they've grown up. Here's hoping Substack does the same. What Katz and Newton make clear is that Nazis are what they perceive to be the low-hanging fruit. It used to be that pedophiles were used to justify censorship. Now, of course, it's when you try to expose pedophiles that you get censored. So platformer, which should be called deplatformer, is made up of all of those high-tech fact-checking flunkies who have appointed themselves the thought police for the peasant class, now that no one cares about mainstream anymore. As Bill Rice Jr. writes in his Substack, and so it begins, by now nobody should be naive. The real goal is to shut down Substack as we've known it, which must mean the truth bombs its correspondents are launching every day are starting to hit too close to key targets. And I think that it's a clue as to those key targets with how they have defined their first onslaught. To take this systematically, I think calls for how to have a better argument. What is hate speech? In moderating my own stack, my principle number 1 is resolutely love all people and relentlessly challenge all ideas that see other people as inferior. Superiority, as I write, is cold hatred. It only turns hot when it's challenged. How many caricatures and stereotype has Newton invoked in order to assert how morally superior he is? Is that not hate speech? I ban commenters who insult and call other names rather than challenging their ideas. Labels make others see those people as legitimate targets of violence, as Antifa demonstrated. You can't counter someone's dehumanization of others by dehumanizing them. People are individuals, not categories of good and bad. If, in fact, these accounts are even real people at all, and not set up as fodder to push censorship as false flag media attacks. And here I put in a meme thanks to Ratio that says, censorship, changing definitions, and rewriting history are the new book burnings. And then I think Substack Standards needs to follow principle number 2. An ethical statement can contain no proper nouns. No matter what rules Substack invoked, if they were written without proper nouns, they would be ethical. They would apply to all people equally and protect all people equally. Once a proper noun is introduced, it becomes a one-sided attack on some while protecting others who engage in the same behavior with different targets. When Newton's Nazi hunters submitted a list of accounts they believed to be in violation of the company's existing policies against incitement to violence, there's no standard given for how they determined incitement to violence. Is exposure of wrongdoing an incitement? Choose from the following. 1. If a historical group has committed acts of violence and you write about it, are you guilty of inciting violence against them? 2. If they haven't committed the acts of violence that you say they did, but violence is done to them as a result, are you then guilty of inciting it? 3. If you reveal that lies were used to intentionally incite violence in the past, are you then guilty of inciting violence against those belonging to the same group as the deceased who wrote the lie? 4. If you perpetuate a lie used to incite violence in the past and silence anyone who contradicts it, do you share in the guilt of the original violence? Principle number 3, define your terms. Newton doesn't bother to define a Nazi, but from his context, it's a person who does not believe the slaughter of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust was an atrocity. Curiously, however, those who question whether the Nazis did actually slaughter 6 million or any Jews are seen as people who want to kill Jews, therefore. They're accused of saying this didn't happen and they deserved it, obviously a contradiction in terms. He then cites the New York Times giving Zuckerberg's reason for deciding to censor Holocaust denial. Quote, Facebook cited a recent survey that found nearly a quarter of American adults aged 18 to 39 said they believed the Holocaust either was a myth or was exaggerated, or they just weren't sure whether it happened. So, if the people who grew up with access to the internet now have a quarter of them decided that they question the Holocaust narrative, that must be the fault of making information available, because obviously those are not people who know how to think for themselves. So we better control the information that people can access, or they might not hate the hate group. And hating is loving, right? And loving, by which I mean paying attention, is actually hate. Controlling what people think is democracy, which has gone off the rails when 25% of young adults think for themselves. And here I've inserted an adorable otter pup photo who thought so hard that his brain froze. Thanks, Ratio. Katz defines Nazi in his extension and other violent white supremacists. To question whether National Socialists were violent white supremacists is something he would censor. He continues, if something that bills itself as a National Socialist website doesn't violate Substack's own policy against hate, what does? So therefore, hatred and bigotry towards Germans is not just legitimate, but questioning that hatred and bigotry using history and facts is actually hatred. Rather than labeling races of people who must be hated, I think Substack's policy should target ideologies of violence and supremacy. And last is principle number 4. Identify the rhetorical divisives, as I call them, that pit one side against the other rather than answering the question. Let's start with the Wikipedia definition of Nazi and determine what are labels and what are ideologies. Wikipedia says, Nazism is a form of fascism with disdain for liberal democracy and the parliamentary system. It incorporates a dictatorship, fervent anti-Semitism, anti-communism, anti-Slavism, scientific racism, white supremacy, Nordicism, social Darwinism, and the use of eugenics in its creed. As opposed to Wikipedia, Mussolini defined fascism as the alliance between business and government, or what the World Economic Forum would call private-public partnerships when they run everything for us. Now, I've read credible sources with no apparent hatred towards anyone who say that the origins of fascism as a political ideology were not militant or autocratic. It's made me wonder whether that's also been distorted. No one much that I know of speaks in defense of dictatorships, although hereditary monarchies with a House of Lords to keep the commoners in check seem to be given a pass. Fidel Castro, however, mentioned to Che Guevara that you couldn't go directly from an economic system of capitalism to a democracy because money would always be used to undermine all of your services like media, and it would thwart everything you tried to do. So I don't think he's wrong about that, which is why my system ignores the form of government and goes directly to the issuance of credit. Who doesn't have disdain for the theme park of liberal democracy these days? You submit your vote, it takes you on a ride, and you end up in the same place you started. If we change the inner circle of elites to banks, tech, corporations, pharma, and media, it's another dictatorship. Katz and Newton want to keep the social hierarchy of free speech for the inner circle with the peasants confined to issuing cat memes. And thanks to the diva for the one that I include that you should really check out in the Substack. And I will end with Wikipedia's definition of anti-Semitism. Hostility to, prejudice towards, or discrimination against Jews. This sentiment is a form of racism. Primarily, anti-Semitic tendencies may be motivated by negative sentiments towards Jews as a people, or by negative sentiment toward Jews with regard to Judaism. As documented by Pepe Escobar, South Africa and 61 other countries have just filed at The Hague an 84-page lawsuit against Israel that includes violation of the 1948 Genocide Convention for acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a nation, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Escobar quotes from the document. It is estimated that over 1.9 million Palestinians out of Gaza's population of 2.3 million people, approximately 85% of the population, have been forced from their homes. There is nowhere safe for them to flee to. Those who cannot leave or refuse to be displaced have been killed or are at extreme risk of being killed in their homes. As noted by the Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Internally Displaced Persons, Gaza's housing and civilian infrastructure have been razed to the ground, frustrating any realistic prospects for displaced Gazans to return home, repeating a long history of forced mass displacement of Palestinians by Israel. The entire population is facing starvation. 93% of the population in Gaza is facing crisis levels of hunger, with more than 1 in 4 facing catastrophic conditions with death imminent. If this causes you to have negative sentiments towards the people who perpetrated this violence, then you are a Nazi. If you have negative sentiments towards the ideology of supremacy that justifies this violence, then you are a Nazi. Because without those Substacker Nazis who are inciting violence, 20,000 Palestinians would still be alive today. Wait a minute. I am not going to hide and cower and give my stacker detractors the aha of discovery. So I'm following this up with my Hitler journey, and then conspiracy theorist, where I say that I am an anti-vaxxer, a conspiracy theorist, a Holocaust denier, and I am 100% anti-Shemitism. Read that last word closely. Not against people, but against an ideology of superiority that some are born to rule and others have been cursed by God to be their slaves. And I will argue that point with anyone.